Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be talking about Great Catherine, a biography of Catherine the Great written by Carolee Erickson. So if you look at the other videos on my channel, a biography is a little different for me, but I have mentioned before I have a growing interest in history. I want to feel more informed, read some nonfiction beyond like memoirs and craft books. So this is a genre of writing that I am less familiar with, so I've been keeping my eye out for recommendations. This book and this writer, Carolee Erickson in particular, were tweeted about by Brandon Taylor and has definitely been mentioned in other videos. I basically add everything he tweets about to my to-buy list. And I definitely want to try to grab some more of Erickson's books now. I can see in the front that she's written several other biographies and histories. I'm enjoying learning a little bit. And I was already, somewhat curious about Catherine the Great and her life, so this was a good place to start. So this book covers the circumstances that brought Catherine to Russia in the first place, her ascension to the throne, her reign, and all the way to her death. And I think this biography gives a good mix of what was going on in her personal life, her family life, her love life, and the political circumstances of her reign, which of course in her case, family and politics were very intertwined. I think this biography shows a pretty fair depiction. She was certainly imperfect, but a remarkable woman nonetheless. So one thing that I keep thinking, reading books like this, histories, things written by journalists, the amount of research that must go into something like this is staggering. I can't imagine the time that goes into sourcing something like this, especially at the level of detail that Erickson achieves. I'm trying to paint an objective picture of a person when so many of the reports of her life are very much not objective, I think was probably a real challenge. And to also make it, engaging and, narratively interesting for a reader. So Catherine herself wrote and rewrote several times a memoir of her early life, right up to the point of seizing the throne. And for some reason, she never really attempted to memoir any part of her reign, even though she was writing these memoirs of her early years, much later. So you can definitely see a lot of detail in what's happening in Catherine's life in that section of this book. But the writer also notes that those memoirs were not without bias in Catherine's favor. And then Catherine didn't keep, a formal record like that of the rest of her life. So the story of her life is really pieced together from her correspondence, letters to and from friends. Erickson mentions referring to accounts written by visitors of the Russian court, making reports. It seems like there's kind of this puzzle of first-hand accounts to put together. But it's put together with a lot of detail. There are elaborate descriptions of the Russian court and these sort of over-the-top parties that they were throwing. It was like an era of lavishness in the European courts, for sure. And when she can, Erickson takes the information she has and does some scene building, which definitely sort of brings you into Catherine in this book a little bit more. The real and documented events and circumstances are used to kind of imagine the internal feelings. And the result is like a very vivid portrait of Catherine the Great's world. And what you learn in this book is that her world was one of extreme suffering. So Catherine goes to Russia at the age of 14 to be married to the Grand Duke Peter, heir to the Russian throne. And you see, even at that young age, Catherine really takes control of her own destiny there. You know, her father doesn't really even want her to go because it would likely mean they'd never see each other again. It's just Russia's too far off. And it's not like, you know, Catherine wouldn't have had other options to be well settled into marriage, but she makes the decision to go be an empress. You know, she seems to have some dreams of grandeur, but that does mean she leaves her very beloved father behind, which is kind of her first heartbreak. You know, from her first moments walking down this path that leads her to being Empress of Russia, things are very difficult. Even just the journey there is very dangerous. It seems like the people in the Russian court of this time period are like constantly nearly freezing to death and falling deathly ill because of the cold. That happens to Catherine multiple times. She does seem to have ongoing medical issues. Like, she's just constantly in pain, especially as she gets older. And, you know, the medical practices of the time were not very helpful. There's this one, like, really particularly brutal scene where she's getting a tooth pulled that just sounds terrible. And her early years in court as the Grand Duchess are characterized by torment at the hands of the current Empress, Empress Elizabeth. And Empress Elizabeth is like sort of very sweet to Catherine at first. She kind of chooses her as a favorite, but Empress Elizabeth is kind of fickle and very, very paranoid about any potential threats to her rule. And Catherine is a threat when she comes in because, you know, she's younger, she's intelligent, she's very likable, charming. And Elizabeth, you know, she took the throne herself by a coup, so it does seem, and history will repeat itself like this in Catherine's story, that kind of the karmic punishment for that is that you're always paranoid someone's going to do it to you. And Empress Elizabeth and other members of the court are very upset with Catherine because she is not getting pregnant, which isn't really her fault because it appears Peter is impotent and he also just shows no interest in her. So she's not producing an heir, which everyone needs to feel sort of secure in the succession of the line. And she's kind of like too smart for her own good. It's like you can very clearly tell as things sort of reach the boiling point that Catherine is either going to win or die. Like, she's not going to be complacent enough to just kind of go along with the way things have been planned. And Empress Elizabeth is like constantly torturing and exiling anyone she suspects of being disloyal to her, which puts Catherine in a dangerous position at a baseline. You know, they have no loyalty to Catherine until she produces an heir. And there's the added danger of the fact that Catherine is kind of plotting. You know, she's gathering allies, she's studying and preparing to be a leader in the government. And while that might be in the role of being kind of a puppeteer for Peter until the point where it becomes clear that will not be possible, she's definitely prepared to supplant him. So there's definitely a lot of mental anguish for Catherine in this time. You know, she's scheming and trying not to be found out, and there's kind of this constant threat from Empress Elizabeth. Peter is very much not kind to her. You know, he's abusive and he like openly humiliates her and like shows interest in any woman except for her. And as Empress Elizabeth's health begins to decline, you know, Peter's also plotting to get rid of Catherine. There was like this law at the time where if a man in the Russian Orthodox Church wanted to divorce his wife, he could do it like no problem and just make her be a nun and exile her and remarry, which Peter was definitely trying to do. One bit of suffering that really struck me was when Catherine gave birth to her first child, Paul, who Peter did not father, but I'll talk more about that. Likely did not father, I guess. After she gives birth to Paul, she's just like left. Like there's no medical attention given to her immediately after. The baby is taken away and she doesn't see him again for a really long time. You know, Empress Elizabeth keeps Catherine's children close to herself, which I believe is reflective of a Russian custom of the time, but also extreme in its cruelty at the whim of Empress Elizabeth. So, I mean, Catherine nearly dies so many times. It's so hard to know who to trust in this court. Really powerful people are just looking for any excuse to get rid of her. It's remarkable that she survives all of this just at a baseline, you know, much less that she actually takes power and tries to make things better. And I think that's really interesting about Catherine the Great, is this boldness and courage throughout her life. I mean, it seems like the stories for noble women of the past are so much determined by outside forces that kind of choose where they end up, and then they deal with the circumstances once they get there, which definitely happened in Catherine's life too. But so many times she has the choice to take the safe path or go the bold, dangerous, history-making way. And she always chooses that big path. There must have just been something inherent in her, something that was very rare for her to even go down the path that she did. You know, people who met her described her as charming and intelligent. You can see in the work that she was trying to do for Russia that she was very idealistic. And she definitely had some ego. I don't think you get to this point without that. I mean, it was quite the bold move to take the throne, to have a coup against Peter, and not even like only going for it to be regent on behalf of her young son, but she went into it planning to be the empress herself. She very much intended to make a mark. So, you know, she was in the Russian court for years while Empress Elizabeth was still alive. And by all accounts, it seems she spent that time really well. She learned to speak Russian. She learned the culture of these people that she was moving into. She learned all about the court. She embraced the Russian Orthodox Church. She spent a lot of her time learning what it would be to be a ruler, what it would take to be a ruler of Russia. She was very well read, very well informed. She was speaking with advisors. She was taking the potential of having this role very seriously. And she was gathering allies to her side. And something else that I feel like I learned in this book that I was particularly struck by, the event of Catherine taking the throne from her husband Peter, obviously that was precipitated because of who Catherine was and all the right moves she made to get to that point. But she also got there because Peter made every single wrong move that Peter could have made. I really just feel like reading this book, Peter was very, very dumb. Just like Catherine, Peter was a foreign prince, brought in when he was chosen as the heir. But unlike Catherine, he never embraced Russia and its culture. In fact, he openly hated a lot of aspects of Russian culture. He was very disrespectful of the Orthodox religion. He seemed to prefer the more Western Lutheran ways. He wasn't doing any prep work or any of his due diligence as somebody who was going to be an emperor. And at the time of Empress Elizabeth's declining health, they were in a bitter, drawn-out war with Prussia, and Peter was openly obsessed with Prussia. He loved their king. He was always rooting for Prussia, which did not make him very popular in Russia. And, when Empress Elizabeth dies, Catherine makes the decision to not immediately seize the throne because she is pregnant in kind of a delicate situation. So she delays. So Peter is the emperor for a short time. And the very first thing he does is end the war with Prussia, declare them allies. He makes the Russian soldiers dress up in Prussian uniforms and just kind of makes everybody really angry at him. So, not a good move in sort of a delicate early time of your rule to turn the entire military against you. And then he also turns all of the clergy against him because he orders all idols of saints removed from the churches, which are very important in Russian Orthodoxy. So he just makes himself as unlikable as possible. So it's easy to see how Catherine was able to win people to her side and take the throne pretty easily. Everything happened pretty cleanly, except for Peter dying very shortly thereafter under mysterious circumstances. So while it certainly seems possible, maybe even likely, Catherine or one of her associates had something to do with that, it's always going to be a shadow over her rule that it, started with regicide. And she didn't bury Peter with the other emperors and empresses in their traditional place. So let's talk a little bit about a big aspect this book covers, which is Catherine's personal life. The newspapers, the kind of tabloids of the time, really treated Catherine like she was kind of like some kind of sex maniac. And that has definitely stuck to her reputation to this day. But reading this book, the truth of it all feels much less scandalous. She did have, a string of lovers in her life, men that she was not married to from the time before she was empress and then all throughout her reign. She had sort of a string of favorites that she would keep close to her. But reading this book, you know, with some of Catherine's correspondence to trusted people, it seems like it was much less about sexual gratification and more about her feeling lonely and really struggling internally to carry the burden of rule alone. You know, she spent her whole life looking for someone to love her and to be a partner in dealing with all of this. And over the course of her life, she just had her heart broken so many times. The one reason this doesn't really seem that scandalous is that affairs like this were very normalized in the Russian court. It kind of seems like everyone that Catherine interacted with was having some sort of extramarital affair. And it seems that that felt unusual to Catherine when she first arrived in Russia. You know, she had to really be strongly encouraged by the people around her to begin her first affair because she didn't want to break her marriage vows. But it was vitally important that Catherine get pregnant and produce an heir that they could at least feign to attribute to Peter. It seems likely that Peter did not father any of Catherine's children, but despite this, Paul was kind of universally accepted as the true heir, Peter's son. You know, after her ascension to the throne and Peter's death, you know, Catherine was avoiding the political ramifications of remarrying. You know, no matter who she might have chosen as a husband, there was always going to be someone who wouldn't be happy with that choice. So I think for a large portion of her life, the safest thing was just to marry no one, rule alone, and have men around to keep her company. Though it does seem she may have had a secret ceremony with Gregory Potemkin, who she met much later in life and kind of considered the love of her life as an ideal partner. And I think while we're talking about him, this is a really good example of some of Erickson's writing. Potemkin knew how to touch Catherine's heart and made her feel cherished. He sang to her, the song sweet and melodious, his voice soft and full of sincerity. He admired the ruins of beauty in her, the fleeting traces of youthfulness in her bright eyes and overpainted complexion. He awoke her passion. He called her a woman of fire and made her believe that for him, she was the only woman in the world. Potemkin was, it seems, genuinely in love with the sovereign he greatly admired. As a very young officer, he had played a minor role in her coup, helping to bring her to the throne. No doubt he remembered her as she had been then, a thrillingly daring figure on a great white horse, riding in triumph toward a unique destiny. He loved her daring, and it matched his own. He loved her forthright, far-ranging mind, with its visions of betterment and change. He, too, had broad and soaring visions. So they were kind of like a perfect match for each other, and Catherine was very, very deeply in love with him. And, of course, there was a lot of heartbreak involved in that, too. Which is, you know, she seems sort of destined to always have some private sadness she's holding on to. But I think, remarkably, it doesn't seem to affect the progress of her rule very much, though it definitely has a negative effect on her health. So, Catherine is very ambitious. You know, she goes into her reign with a clear vision for Russia. She works with her advisors, she researches, she plans. You know, she is very competent as a leader. And she does a lot of great things. She makes a lot of progress for Russia in that time period. So she's certainly trying to follow in the footsteps of Peter the Great, who was a very progressive ruler, very active and brought about a lot of change in Russia. And despite Empress Elizabeth's cruelty to her, I definitely think you can see influences from her in Catherine in some interesting ways. But comparing her to Elizabeth, Catherine is much more involved. She's very hands-on. She doesn't push any of the duties onto anyone else. She's very capable, but she has, you know, similar problems to Elizabeth in kind of the questions of her succession. And some of the paranoia that followed Elizabeth's life follows Catherine as well. You know, she also got her place by staging a coup, so why couldn't someone else do that? It seems she doesn't have a very good relationship with Paul as he gets older. You know, she's very distrustful of him, probably for good reason, distrustful that he's trying to supplant her. She seems to treat him very coldly. There seems to be some discussion and consideration of skipping Paul altogether in the succession when Paul's son, Catherine's grandson, Alexander, seems to be so much better suited for the role of emperor. I don't know, reading all of this, it made me wonder if things could have been different for Paul if Catherine had had more of a motherly relationship with him. But I don't know, they seem kind of strained from each other, and as a result, Paul kind of indulges these fantasies about his father, Peter, you know, and wanting to avenge him. Also, something I found interesting, when Paul's wife has children, Catherine doesn't treat them with the same degree of cruelty that she was treated, but she does continue the practice of taking those children, keeping them kind of away from their mother and close to her. And then those grandchildren get all the benefits of a motherly figure in Catherine and guidance and education from her that I don't know if Paul got to the same degree. I know it's interesting, these family dynamics and the huge effect they're having on the running of a country. You know, she was an accomplished ruler. You know, she considered herself to be enlightened. She studied philosophy and applied that to how she ruled. And in like the early days of her reign, that's kind of how Europe saw her as well, before they sort of made her into this joke. You know, she had many philosopher, scholarly friends, including Voltaire, and she took it very seriously, kind of like the soul of the nation. You know, the questions of what Russia was going to be in the future and moving Russia into that future closer to the other courts in Europe. She worked every day. She was very dedicated. She was definitely not a Democrat. She believed very much in the monarchy, but she believed in a more humane monarchy than what she had seen in Empress Elizabeth, a more fair monarchy. And she had a lot of big accomplishments. You know, she established a system of local governments, processes for you know, enforcing the law throughout Russia so that local people were not just sort of at the whims of whoever owned land nearby. She built a lot of new towns, brought in immigration to fill those towns, you know, developed industry. She had a big focus on education and literacy. You know, she built a lot of schools. And because of all of this and some of her victories in war, Russia was being taken seriously on kind of the global stage for maybe the first time. I think later in life she gets perhaps a little over hung up with the idea of conquering. She's like going to war a lot, putting a strain on the finances of her country. But overall, she seemed really intelligent and thoughtful in her decisions. She worked with her advisors, and, you know, she ruled for her entire life and made a lot of progress. Like, definitely some really big accomplishments in there. Overall, a very happy rule for the time period. So it's definitely annoying, the kind of sexist tendency to boil her down to her sex life that is still kind of a big part of the Catherine the Great narrative to this day. But, you know, she was loved as well. You know, they chose to call her Catherine the Great for a reason. So I think Erickson, as a biographer, she's careful to write an honest picture. She kind of explicitly says that in her author's note at the back, that, you know, when writing about Catherine the Great, people either over-romanticize her or kind of fall into that tabloidy vein of talking about her life. But it seems the truth of Catherine is somewhere in the middle. She was certainly imperfect in a lot of ways, but that doesn't, you know, take away from some truly remarkable accomplishments in her life. You know, she's an example of somebody who took her power and her responsibility really seriously and just seemed uniquely born for it, very capable to lead and to take power. You know, there's a quote from her in the time where Empress Elizabeth's health was failing and it was coming down to the point of if she was going to have the coup, if she was going to take power from Peter or not. And she's quoted as saying, "I am resolved to perish or to reign." And I don't know, I think there's a boldness in that that you kind of have to respect. Okay, so if you want to learn more about Catherine the Great, I would definitely recommend this book. I'm looking forward to trying to read more of Erickson's work. Also, if you have any recommendations of similar biographies, histories, I'm kind of new to all of that, so definitely open to recommendations. Okay, that is all I have for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.